Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good morning. On this mildly okay day so far, it's not scorching hot yet, but we're getting there. Okay, so today's going to be a semi-short talk. We're on the last of the six Dharma gates in the Sublime, churning and purification. I don't want to go into too much detail for a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons is it's a long journey to get to there, and I myself have not fully realized the last either, so I shan't be speaking on something I have not mastered. But I'll be discussing on the churning and on purification a little bit. And they're not so much steps like the preceding gates, right, where there's techniques and steps that we go through to get to those points. Churning and purification is essentially crossing the finish line, right? Churning is being able to see the finish line, and purification is passing the finish line. And so, because it's just seeing and passing the finish line, that means we've already done all the work necessary to get to the finish line, right? Imagine running a marathon, and you either finish it or you don't, right? You either have the energy and the willpower to complete the marathon and get to the end, or you don't. So it's kind of the same thing here. So by the time you get to the fifth gate, all the heavy lifting, all the work to get there has already been completed. So at the turning point, after contemplation, so the first three gates, right, we're following the samatha method of meditation, right, the concentration piece of meditation. And so we're counting, we're following, and we're stabilizing. That is perfecting the contemplation, perfecting samatha. By the time we get to the contemplation, then when we shift the method of meditation from samatha to vipassana, right, to insight meditation, or just contemplation. And so at the contemplation piece, because when we're practicing concentration meditation, there's no realization of wisdom, right? There's no attainment of any wisdom, because it's not the method of practice that's being done. It's simply just developing and perfecting our concentration. But when we get to the contemplation gate, this is where we're making that shift from not really having anything in our mind to having something in our mind in order to realize its truth. And so we started doing the contemplation. So this is where we're taking, if we're following specific vipassana methods, right, you can do that, or we can shift contemplation to contemplating on a topic of discussion, right? So anything in Buddhism, essentially. Any topic that we need to contemplate and try to penetrate. And so by the time we get to churning, at that point, our concentration is practically perfected. We're able to get into meditation, or get into a jhana state without any effort, right? There's no need for the preceding steps to get there. You don't have to make yourself count or make yourself follow or do the stabilization or anything like that. You're able to enter that meditation mindset with little effort. And it's also where we're able to, this is where also some realizations may happen. So it's said that you're able to come to the realization of the three Dharma gates, three doors of liberation. So it's realizing emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. This is also where we penetrate the 37 factors of enlightenment. This is where we're also able to penetrate the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination, and realizing the correct practice of the middle way. So these are the realizations that happen within the churning period. And then once you have realized or attained those realizations, the Four Noble Truths, 37 factors, 3 doors of liberation, 12 links, and the middle way, right? This is entering a potential or full-on first level of enlightenment, right? Which means we've also cut off the guarantee that you'll no longer be reborn in any of the lower 3 realms, right? Hell, hungry ghost, and animal. Once we get there, then depending on your goal of realization, whether you want to become an arhat, fully enlightened, escape the process of life and death, or continue on with your bodhisattva vow to continue to be reborn in order to save all sentient beings. So at this point, this is where that kind of mentality comes in. Because if your goal is to become an arhat, fully enlightened, and be done with life forever, then you can stop at turning. There's no longer proceed. You no longer have to advance further. However, if you do want to advance further and live out your bodhisattva vow and live out your vow to become a Buddha, then we can continue to the purification. Purification is literally just that. It is the realization, the purification of our entire practice. This is where the defilements of self disappears. This is where the defilements of wrong thinking disappears. This is the defilements of the realization of the 5 aggregates, 5 skandhas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And so at this point, if you're able to get to the purification, purify those practices, then also now guarantees that you would be reborn, or would only be born in the 3 higher realms of existence: humans, asuras, and devas, or according to your vows. Essentially it. There's not much to it. There's no instruction like the previous gates. These are essentially just the recognition and the realization of what may potentially happen, right? So it's the realization of the Four Noble Truths, 12 links, middle way, 37 factors, and then it's realizing the full direct experience of samadhi, right, which is the one pointedness concentration. This is where our concentration of, our realization of all jhana levels are also perfected. Another way of looking at this is that churning, because there's technically 8 levels of jhana, right? Jhana is a deep, it's a very deep meditation, right? This is where crazy things happen in our mind. But the 4 first jhanas are called the form jhanas, or the rupa jhanas. The 4 higher, so 5 through 8, is the formless jhanas, arupa jhanas. And so the arupa jhanas, the very last, the 8th, it is the realization of nothingness. It is a realization of no perception, non-perception. So the duality of things, even at churning, starts to disappear. Start to recognize that there is no duality in life, right? Duality is just something that's made up. And so when you're able to escape wrong thinking, which is duality, seeing this and that, calling this and that, naming this and that, name and form essentially. Right? This is duality. This is also why the 3 doors of liberation of emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness is important. Because emptiness It's seeing the reality of things. It's taking away the name and form we give to things, right? If we have a cup of tea, if it's full, we can say this is a cup of tea. If it's empty, then this is a cup of air. But how we describe it being full or empty, it's dependent on the contents, right? And this is how we describe everything in life. This is a flower, but it's an orchid. We call it an orchid, right? This is a statue, but we call it a Buddhist statue. Or it's, what is this? Marble, we call it a Buddhist statue, right? So it's adding name and form to things versus seeing things for what they are. This is penetrating the emptiness and seeing beyond the signs of things, signlessness, right? This is adding the naming conventions to things. Literally a sign. Think of a sign. What does a sign do? The sign is literally telling you something, right? And so when we penetrate signlessness, is seeing the no sign of a sign, or seeing the sign as a no sign. It doesn't make much sense. But think of the background of a sign. If I get a sheet of paper and I call this a sign, and I put quite simple on it as a sign. If I didn't write anything on it, but it's still a little piece of paper, is it still a sign, or is it now just a piece of paper? Is it a sign because there's words on it? Is it not a sign because now there's no words on it? Right? And so, not seeing that seeing is signlessness. And then wishlessness is the recognition or the realization, the eradication of a few things, but most importantly is expectation. And part of this expectation is aversion and wanting, right? We want pleasurable things, we want nice things, we want to taste good food, we want to smell good things, we want to touch good things, we want to experience good things. But then on the other hand, we don't want to have bad food, we don't want to experience ugly things, we don't want to do that. So there's a give and take. And the eradication of that wanting and not wanting, right, is part of wishlessness. And so that's why once we get to purification, at that point, you're essentially fully enlightened, if need be. It is the recognition of our path, recognition of our journey, realization of our journey of the path. Okay, I'm talking too much about it when I just said I wasn't going to. But for the sake of our practice, the first 4 gates are probably the most we will always be sticking with. And more than likely, just the first 3. Because once we get this list is in specific order because it has to follow these specific instructions, right? 1 gate can only be realized once the preceding gate is fully realized, right? So if you can't master counting and penetrate that practice, penetrate that technique to truly master it, then you can't move on to following. And if you can't follow your object of meditation, whether it's your breath or visualization or mantra or whatever it may be that you're following, if you're unable to successfully do that without constantly being distracted or constantly thinking this or that, or constantly allowing distractions or thoughts to arise, then how are you going to stabilize yourself, right? And if your meditation is not stable, meaning nearly perfect, right? At stabilization, this is where we enter axis concentration, right? Potentially even the first jhana level, if it's strong enough. And at that, which means that our object of meditation is so strong that no external distractions will be able to penetrate that concentration. If you still continue to have thoughts, they'll be just short, wispy, kind of in the background, right? They're not able to take hold of your object of meditation. They're unable to take hold of your concentration. You recognize them, you see them, you label them, and they'll go away. There is no them pushing away your object of meditation. And so once you get to that point, right, where whether you are not thinking at all, or having no thoughts at all, or having little thoughts, little wispy thoughts, and if you're able to maintain that concentration for the duration of your meditation session, for multiple sessions, right? Just because you've succeeded in one session doesn't mean you're going to succeed in another session, right? And so even if you get out of your session and say, wow, that was a really good sit. My concentration was pretty near perfect, or it's very strong, or I got distracted so many little times, or whatever it may be. Don't carry that expectation to your next sit, right? Because if you do, and you go into your next sit thinking it's going to be the exact same as the last one, and it's not, then you discourage yourself right then and there. And so, letting go of the expectation, right, which is part of that wishlessness, is just letting things be. It is what it is, kind of a mindset, right? But if you continue to practice and continue to have multiple really good sessions, right? Let's say you've had 5 really good sessions in a row, and then your 6th session you kind of weren't as fully meditated, right? Don't let that get discouraging either, right? Because what's going to happen is you may think that you may have missed a step, you did something wrong, you didn't recognize something when it came up, you didn't do something right, you're questioning the steps, you're questioning your method, you're questioning the technique. When really it's just you had one bad session, but you had 5 preceding good sessions. So you continue on. Now, another question I often get is, well, how many good sessions do I have to have before I say my meditation is perfect or near perfect, right? My answer to that, it's the answer to my own question, when I ask myself that, is one of the signs for each gate, especially the first few ones, one of the signs that you can recognize that you've mastered it to an extent where it no longer works is just that. So if you're sitting on counting, and counting will work for a while, but eventually it starts to become potentially boring, or so routine and so automatic that you're just counting, but you're also playing a move in your head, right? You're able to master it, that you're able to multitask. That's not true mastery. You've just become bored, potentially, or you did truly master it. And when I say mastering it is, if you are counting and you do get distracted, right, and the counting continues to happen without the shift of your attention to the distraction, right, versus you may be counting and distracted, right, but you're going back and forth, right? You're like, oh, I think I was at 3, so let me continue in 4, 5, 6, and you're distracted again. You're entertaining the distracting thought. But then you remember you're still trying to count, and so you're like, oh, where did I leave off? Am I back at 1? So you continue on, right? That's bad practice. That's bad concentration. But if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, and you're distracted, but you're still fully mindful and aware of your counting, and you're fully aware that you're distracted, the distraction only sits for a few seconds before you continue back to your counting without having to question, oh, where was I? Or do I have to start over, right? The counting is more dominant than the distraction, right? This is how you know you're getting better or you're perfecting it, versus the other way around, where your distraction is more dominant than the counting. And so it's going to what's what I'm looking for? It's going to shift very often for the first few sits, weeks, months. But once there's a balance, or there's a higher shift in the object of meditation, counting, then you can say, I'm practiced enough, or I'm good enough to continue on. It's the same thing for following and stabilization. As long as whatever gate you're on is more dominant than the distraction or the objects of distraction or the hindrances, then you know you're on the right path. But if there's too much shifting, or there's too much weight on the object, if there's too much weight on the distraction, then just know you need more work before you continue on. That's essentially the same for the rest of them. I still don't have my clock. It's not that I don't remember it, it's just I can't find it. I keep looking at an empty spot, hoping it's there. Okay, I'll stop there. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? I already warned you this wasn't going to be an enlightening discussion. It's a heavy one. And for the most part, it's I don't want to say unattainable, but it's impractical for the common meditator.
Just to try to make sure that I understand all of this. For my practice, is it possible, or is it, I guess what I'm asking is, if this is okay, because this is what my practice looks like. At first, there was a lot of focus on counting and following and stabilization, and then they got easier and easier and easier. And in a sense, I feel like they've been brushed away to where I go into meditation and go straight into contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, during my meditation, I say contemplation, and then realization, and then after that, it starts going through a process of purification. So for me, it's like 4, 5, 6 in every meditation. It's just like it's like a cycle that I'm going through, and I keep repeating, kind of like I don't know, like a washer or something. It's like all the impurities are coming up. I'm able to see clearly certain things that need to be diminished, and it's just like going through those steps over and over and over. So I'm no longer really using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I just repeat it.
And that's fine. Because 1, 2, and 3 are essentially, just think of them as pre-gaming, right? Or pre-practices, or just warming up, right? Think of it just warming up. It's there to help get you to stabilization, right? To stabilize your meditation. But again, eventually you'll get to a point, as I mentioned, where the process of going into true concentration, true meditation becomes effortless, right? You don't need the the warm-ups. You don't need the warm-ups to enter a deep meditation. For most people, when you say meditation, it'll take about 5-10 minutes just to settle the mind, right? And to be able to balance that mind and body kind of stabilization. But eventually, once you get practiced enough, you don't need to warm up. You can just sit, and your mind already knows how to generate the factors to be able to go dive right in, right? So that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. It doesn't have to go in order. The order, again, the first 3 is concentration part. It's just helping you get into the zone. And by 4, you're in the zone. And 5 and 6 is just perfecting the zone. So you're doing it right. Or that's how it would be, should be. Good question.
So when we go through the scriptures, like here, I'm kind of like, I go through what takes me there quicker. The structure takes me, the beginning structure takes me kind of away from my life. And it's the heart that takes me into the deeper meditation, that jump. And I'm not, it's not a criticism of it. It's just I wonder if men and women are just truly different. And like her question was like, so I get it, you know, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a proper question. It was a very good question. I thought it seems like the structure takes me away from my jumping. I like the way that she said structure, because the way that I see 1, 2, and 3 is kind of like a scaffolding. And it was helpful. It was helpful. But now that I've gotten to in more touch with my body instincts, then it's like, okay, that can follow me now. But it's a good guide.
Right.
It was necessary for me at a certain point in my practice. But now that it no longer serves, in a sense, or it's done its job, I can let it go. Just let it go. And then just go straight.
That reminds me of the story of the rabbit. So we use a rabbit to get across the raging river. And once I cross it, I can read the rabbit. So we don't carry it around our back to the next river. We just wait till we get there and go. Impermanent.
I don't think there is much difference between men and women, to your point. It's a dualistic view, first of all. That's name and form, right?
I have this vision of emptiness kind of being the male and then both of us being the female. So there's kind of duality side by side. But it's like the beginning of everything is totally united. So I see it that way. But sometimes when you're communicating, you put these labels on, so I can talk to you. So I'm not listening. Not sure. I know it's difficult because the duality we can make just from having words.
Right. Yeah. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with saying this is a man, this is a woman, and having to see the world in dualistic ways, right? There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. What makes it wrong from the Buddhist perspective is clinging to those ideas that this is how this is supposed to be, and that's how this is supposed to be, right? This is what a woman should do, this is what a man should do, this is how a man should sit, this is how a woman should sit, etc., etc. This is a flower, it should be blooming and not dead, or this is a chair, it should be comfortable and not unsturdy, whatever it may be, right? And so when we apply those expectations to things, right, to what we believe should be or how it should be, then that's where dualism becomes dangerous. But, right, we're just human. We're not perfect beings yet. We're still working on it. Mm-hmm.
But then to achieve the state of meditation, we have to let that fall away. Because it's just a convention, it's just thoughts, and we're trying to move beyond thought.
Right. And that's entirely contingent on our surroundings, our environment, our upbringing. Imagine you were born in a cave somewhere in the middle of nowhere. You've never seen another person other than yourself your entire life. You've never seen civilization. You've never seen another human. You've never seen a book or a TV or a pen or paper, right? Imagine you've never seen anything except your cave, the animals in your surroundings, and the forest or wherever you are. Imagine that's all you know, right? Would it be better to know everything else in the world? Would it be better to know that cars exist, that houses exist, that other people exist, that textbooks exist, that movies exist, that games exist, that traffic exists, that jobs exist? Is it beneficial to know those things? Is it beneficial to or helpful in any way toward your enlightenment? Right, which is perfectly fine, right? The Buddha describes that there's 84,000 Dharma doors, meaning there's 84,000 different ways to attain enlightenment. So there's no one right way. And so to some, you'd say, yes, if I knew that nothing other than myself existed in the world, that means I don't have to worry about other people. I don't have to worry about a job. I don't have to worry about social media. I don't have to worry about who likes me, who doesn't like me. I don't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I don't have to worry about paying bills, right? All that worry of the world doesn't exist. But to another person, those worries and those sufferings could be a potential tool for their realization. Or it can be a distraction. This is how we view things, how we accept things, how we want things to be and don't be. So, for me, if I knew the world didn't exist, this is my thought process. If I didn't know the world existed, that may also mean that I don't know if Buddhism exists. So I may not know that the path to realization exists. I would have to somehow stumble upon it on my own. So is that better, more beneficial than someone who's in the world and knows that the world exists and knows that Buddhism exists? That means you have more of an advantage of attaining enlightenment than I do. So I'm okay with the world. Just don't attach to it. Know that the world, just like every single thought and desire you have, is impermanent. Right? And knowing that it's impermanent makes things easier. It makes living in the world easier. Otherwise, if you don't accept impermanence, then you're going to accept attachment and clinging, and the idea of self and expectations and all this other deranged thinking that we have.
So we leave that behind, we meditate. And yet when we come back into do what we do, because we meditated, then we're still dealing with things that arise in our modern life.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have social media, we have traffic, we have all these things that are distractions.
Correct. But then when you get in meditation, you abandon those things, right? You lose your sense of, hopefully, your sense of self, sense of time, sense of place. Because at the turning, or once you get into at least access concentration, true, the real mind state of meditation, where you fully or mostly really concentrated, you'll start to notice sensations in the body. You'll start to know some tingling. You may start to see some nimitta, right, which is mental objects like shapes and colors or lights. And you'll notice that your breathing starts to slow down or may disappear altogether. You'll start to notice that your senses, your bodily sensations disappear. Your sensation of sound disappears, right? And so once all this dissipates, or your senses are all gone, and you feel like you're in complete emptiness, completely out of this world, I guess, in some way. None of the outside world matters anyway. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what's what, who's what. None of that comes into play regardless, right? But at the same time, it's good that we have distractions in the world because it gives us something to work with. It gives us a way to recognize what is truly distracting and what is truly helpful. What is more beneficial to our practice and what isn't beneficial to our practice? Is this way better than that way, right? And so it allows us to experiment and to compare and try different things in order to find one of 84,000 ways to become enlightened. It doesn't necessarily have to happen through meditation either. Right? There are so many stories of the Buddha's disciples attaining enlightenment from the most mundane, random things, like sweeping, right? Or there was another disciple that was skipping rocks in the river, enlightenment. There's another one that got enlightenment when he was cooking for the Sangha, or as an offering, enlightenment. And so the beauty of 84,000 different ways of enlightenment is kind of more encouraging than the idea that most people have that I don't think I can become enlightened. I don't have the capacity or the will to become enlightened. You do. But most people think enlightenment has to happen sitting in meditation for 70,000 days or something, right? That's not necessary. It's one way. It's one way out of 84,000 ways. So your method of meditation or thinking or believing this or that will work for you. It won't work for me. It won't work for Leon or Michelle. It'll work for you, and that's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's also a really great way and point to see the interconnectedness of everything and everyone, right? Last week during the Dharma talk, we were talking about chapter 12, the Lotus Sutra, where the dragon princess gave the Buddha a priceless jewel, right? But I described that priceless jewel can be a pebble. It can be a little rock. It can be a piece of paper. Why? Because any jewel, whether priceless or useless, comes from this earth. And where does the earth come from? Where do we come from? We come from the universe. We all come from the exact same source that created the entire cosmos. There was a huge, potentially big bang, shot out all the star throw up, right? And the star dust throw up created all the planets and created us. So that means that the priceless jewel that we say is priceless because it's shiny and it's a beautiful color, why is that more priceless than a pebble? Because it all comes from the same place. So what makes this more priceless than that? Isn't that just our perception, our idea of what's considered pretty or ugly? Right. Correct. It's also a metaphor for emptiness and interconnectedness. That this jewel, this, let's say, crystal or ruby, right? It's only very valuable because we gave it value. But we did the same thing with the pebble. The reason why we gave the ruby more value is because it's less likely to be seen in the world versus the pebble, which is everywhere. But imagine it was the other way around. Imagine the streets were filled with rubies and diamonds and precious gems that's making up our streets. Then the pebbles, the little boring little brown, rocky, gray things are the rarities in the world. But regardless of how rare or common it is, it comes from the same place. It comes from the earth. And the earth comes from the universe. And so we're all connected, whether we see it or believe it. All connected. And the realization of that is the penetration of emptiness. Go for it.
So I don't know if this will be helpful to anybody, but I just wanted to share my experience. I started meditating in 2019, and I was texting Master Palm Tree recently, and I said that I got stuck at the place where senses fall off, where all of the senses just are gone, and I'm just like a tiny speck. Like the only thing that exists is just me, this tiny speck, and there's nothing else. And it's just a void. It's silence, and it's everything, and it's nothing at the same time. And it's such a peaceful place of unity, and so much more. But it was just so much peace that I didn't know that there was anything beyond it. I got stuck there because of my attachment to the peace that I felt for like 4.5 years. I never got past that point because I didn't know about contemplation and turning and purification. And so it's a really peaceful place to be. But the thing is, for myself, is once you get out of that meditation state, and then the senses kind of start coming back on, and I start to integrate myself back into the world, the egos are still there, the attitudes are still there, their versions, the gravitating towards pleasure and avoiding pain, like all those things are still sitting there. It's like I have the opportunity to go past that. And so I just wanted to say that so that people don't get stuck. Because, part of me feels like, gosh, I could spend 4.5 years looking at so many other things. Right, I know. There's sadness. yes, or maybe I don't know. And that's definitely one way to look at it, because sometimes information doesn't come my way, books don't come my way, teachings won't come my way until the universe is like, okay, now you've prepared enough with all the things you've been doing in the first 4.5 years of your spiritual development that you can actually utilize the teachings that I'm about to give you. So there's like that part of the ego that likes to make me feel guilty that I need to just, you know.
That stuckness is actually very common. And the peacefulness in that time becomes an addiction. And it's also, unfortunately, a misrepresentation of nirvana. When people enter jhana, for instance, or at least a very deep meditation, and where thought does completely stop, and the senses do completely go away, people mistake that for nirvana all the time. There's so many stories about it, right? But you will know it's not nirvana because when you get out and all the expectations, all the aggregates, the whole world comes flooding back, and you're like, oh man, I don't want this. You know that was not nirvana. Yes. That's right. You're returning to your destination. You bought a round-way ticket, not a one-way ticket. So just know that. Yes.
There's some stories from, I think, in Buddhist, and the way they advertise is it's like you're on the path, Sangha, moving toward the goal, and people are getting tired of getting frustrated. So the Buddha created a rest area, avatar, rest area. It's like Nirvana. It's just a place where people can stop, rest, get their energy back, then, but not mistake it for the goal.
Mm-hmm.
That was the trick. It's like I get in this beautiful oasis in the middle of the desert, and I think my goal is not.
It's a chapter on the Phantom City, the Lotus Sutra.
All that, like getting stuck in a waiting room, you confuse it for like the castle or like this beautiful kingdom, but you're sitting in the waiting room.
And your house has all these beautiful rooms, and you think this is your room here.
Yes. That's exactly what deep meditation is. It's simply a resting place. It can be a resting place, momentarily at least. Okay. I need to find this clock. If there's no questions, then we'll do our first sit. So feel free to stretch if need be. Please rise for our walking meditation. Welcome back. Since we're just at time, we have one more class left, and that last class will be the complete overview of the 6 Dharma gates. And then we will be on the 6th of July for a retreat. So I hope to see everyone there. That'll be the conclusion to our practice. See how well we've been studying and doing all year. So anyway, I'll see you in last class and then for a retreat or tomorrow. Thank you. Namaste.